Europe in the early 20th century was a powder keg of tension, a network of alliances and rivalries ready to explode. The continent was a complex web of political, military, and economic interests. The great powers, puffed up with pride and ambition, had been playing a dangerous game of political chess for decades. Each move calculated, each alliance a potential trigger. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a patchwork of different nationalities, was struggling to hold itself together. Nationalist movements within its borders threatened to tear it apart. Germany, newly unified and ambitious, was flexing its industrial and military muscles, rapidly modernizing and expanding its influence. Eager to assert its dominance on the world stage, its leaders were determined to secure a place among the great empires. Britain, the reigning global superpower, watched Germany's rise with suspicion, wary of its growing power and ambitions. Its vast empire feeling the pressure of German competition. The British were determined to maintain their supremacy. France, still smarting from its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, nursed a deep resentment towards Germany, a wound that had not healed, and yearned to reclaim its lost provinces of Alsace-Lorraine. The desire for revenge simmered beneath the surface. Russia, a vast and sprawling empire ruled by the Tsar, was also a key player in this delicate balance of power. Its sheer size and resources made it a formidable force. Amidst this tangle of alliances and animosity, a sense of unease prevailed. The air was thick with the anticipation of conflict. In this atmosphere of suspicion, fear, and imperial ambition, it would only take a small spark to ignite a conflagration that would engulf the entire world. That fateful spark came on a sunny June day in 1914 in the city of Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, a province recently annexed by Austria-Hungary. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were on an official visit to Sarajevo. As the Archduke's motorcade drove through the streets, a young Bosnian Serb nationalist named Gavrilo Princip saw his opportunity. He pulled out a pistol and fired 2 shots, fatally wounding the Archduke and his wife. Austria-Hungary, outraged by the assassination, blamed Serbia for harboring and supporting terrorists. Germany, bound by its alliance with Austria-Hungary, offered its unconditional support. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of Serbia, mobilized its army in preparation for war. Within weeks, the world was at war, a war that would prove to be far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The early days of the war were marked by a sense of naive optimism, a belief that it would be a short and glorious affair. German troops, following the Schlieffen Plan, swept through Belgium towards Paris. Their advance only halted at the First Battle of the Marne. On the Eastern Front, Russia launched an offensive into East Prussia, but was decisively defeated by the German army at the Battle of Tannenberg. As the war progressed, it became clear that this was not the short and glorious conflict that many had envisioned, but a brutal war of attrition. The Western Front, a jagged scar running across the fields of France and Belgium, became synonymous with the horrors of World War I. It was here that the war descended into a bloody stalemate, a grinding war of attrition in which millions of men would be sacrificed for the gain of a few yards of mud. Life in the trenches was a horrific experience, a constant battle against mud, disease, and the ever-present threat of enemy fire. New technologies of war such as machine guns, artillery, and poison gas made the battlefield a terrifying and deadly place. Despite the horrific conditions and the seemingly endless cycle of violence, both sides remained locked in a deadly embrace. Battles like the Somme, Verdun, and Passchendaele became etched in history as examples of the futility and brutality of the war. Section 5. The Eastern Front, a vast battlefield of mobility and crushing defeats. In contrast to the static trench warfare of the Western Front, the Eastern Front was a more fluid affair, characterized by vast distances and the movement of large armies. Russia, despite its initial setbacks, continued to pose a significant threat to the Central Powers. However, the Russian army was hampered by poor leadership, inadequate supplies, and a lack of modern equipment. Germany used its superior railroads and logistics to move its troops quickly and efficiently, allowing it to concentrate its forces and inflict decisive defeats on the Russian army. The battles of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes in 1914 demonstrated the effectiveness of German military tactics. The vast distances and harsh weather conditions of the Eastern Front took a heavy toll on both sides. The Eastern Front, though often overshadowed by the Western Front, was no less brutal or significant, claiming the lives of millions and shaping the course of the war. Section 6. The Ottoman Battlefield. From Gallipoli to the Armenian Tragedy. The Ottoman Empire, once a mighty power, entered the war in 1914 on the side of the Central Powers. This decision would have far-reaching consequences not only for the empire itself but for the entire region. The Ottoman Empire's entry into the war opened up new fronts in the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and the Middle East. These new battlefronts stretched the empire's resources and tested the resolve of its soldiers. One of the most significant campaigns of the war in the Ottoman Empire was the Gallipoli Campaign, an audacious plan by the Allies to capture the Gallipoli Peninsula. The goal was to open a new front and secure a sea route to Russia. The Gallipoli Campaign, launched in 1915, was a disaster for the Allies. Despite their initial hopes, the campaign quickly turned into a nightmare. The landings at Gallipoli were met with fierce resistance from the Ottoman defenders, and the campaign quickly bogged down into a bloody stalemate. The harsh terrain and well-prepared Ottoman forces made progress nearly impossible. After months of fighting and heavy casualties on both sides, the Allies were forced to evacuate Gallipoli in December 1915. The campaign ended in failure, with significant loss of life and no strategic gains. While the Gallipoli campaign raged on, another tragedy was unfolding within the borders of the Ottoman Empire: the Armenian Genocide. This dark chapter in history saw the systematic extermination of the Armenian people. The Armenian Genocide, a horrific act of brutality and barbarism, claimed the lives of an estimated 1.5 million Armenians and stands as one of the darkest chapters of human history. The world watched in horror as an entire population was targeted for annihilation. Section 7. The Crumbling Empires, Seeds of Revolution and Dissolution. As the war dragged on, its insatiable appetite for men and resources took a heavy toll on all the belligerent nations. Empires already strained by internal divisions and nationalist aspirations began to crumble under the pressure. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, a patchwork of different nationalities held together by the Habsburg dynasty, was particularly vulnerable. Russia, its vast army bled white by years of fighting, faced a revolution in 1917 that would topple the Tsar and plunge the country into civil war. The February Revolution of 1917 forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate, ending centuries of Romanov rule. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power in a coup d'état, promising peace, bread, and land. Section 8. The War's End. A new world order emerges from the ashes. In 1917, the United States, outraged by the sinking of the Lusitania and German unrestricted submarine warfare, entered the war on the side of the Allies. The arrival of fresh American troops and resources on the Western Front boosted Allied morale. Germany, its resources depleted and its army exhausted, launched a last-ditch offensive in the spring of 1918. The German offensive, initially successful, ultimately failed, and the Allies launched a counter-offensive that drove the German army back. On November 11, 1918, Germany, facing imminent defeat, signed the Armistice of Compiègne, ending the fighting on the Western Front. The Great War was over, leaving behind a world shattered and transformed. The Paris Peace Conference, convened in 1919, aimed to redraw the map of Europe and establish a lasting peace. The Treaty of Versailles, signed with Germany in 1919, imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including territorial losses, disarmament, and heavy reparations payments. Section 9. Legacy of the Great War. A world forever changed. The Great War, the war to end all wars, had a profound and lasting impact on the world, shaping the course of the 20th century and beyond. It was a conflict that involved nations from across the globe, bringing unprecedented levels of destruction and change. The war left an indelible scar on the psyche of a generation, shattering illusions of progress, reason, and human decency. The sheer scale of the devastation was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. The unprecedented scale of death and destruction, the horrors of trench warfare, and the use of new and terrible weapons of war left a deep sense of trauma and disillusionment. Soldiers and civilians alike were forever changed by the experiences they endured. The war also had a profound impact on the political landscape of the world. It led to the collapse of long-standing empires and the rise of new political ideologies. Empires crumbled, new nations were born, and old orders were swept away. The map of Europe and the world was redrawn in the aftermath of the conflict. The Treaty of Versailles, while intended to create a lasting peace, sowed the seeds of future conflict by imposing harsh penalties on Germany. This treaty would later be seen as a contributing factor to the rise of World War II. The war also accelerated social and technological changes. Innovations in medicine, industry and technology were spurred by the necessities of war, and societal roles, especially for women, began to shift dramatically. The Great War, a tragedy of unprecedented scale, stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the importance of diplomacy, understanding, and cooperation in a world still grappling with the legacies of the past. It is a lesson that continues to resonate today, urging us to strive for a more peaceful and just world.